Our guest today is Israeli political scientist and author David Ranan. We'll be discussing his new book, which deals with anti-Semitism among Muslims in Germany. David Ranan, welcome.
Nice to be here.
You grew up in Israel, you live in London and Berlin, and you've done research in many different countries. Where is being Jewish less of an issue?
I've never had a problem anywhere being Jewish. I'm fortunate in that I've personally never experienced any incidents of anti-Semitism. But I suppose being Jewish is not an issue in Israel because it's accepted as a matter of course.
But that's not necessarily the case in other countries. Anti-Semitism is, after all, a global phenomenon. You've done research on this at Berlin's Technical University. How would you define anti-Semitism?
Oh, there's a lot of disagreement about that. And that's one of the subjects of my research. A lot of people talk about anti-Semitism and claim that certain kinds of behavior can be considered anti-Semitic. But there's no agreement on what anti-Semitism actually is. We need a proper definition. I like the one that the British philosopher Brian Klug uses. He defines anti-Semitism as hostility towards Jews as Jews, meaning toward characteristics that are ascribed to Jews but which they actually do not possess.
So people who oppose Israeli government policy are not necessarily anti-Semitic?
Absolutely not. There are certainly anti-Semites among those critics, but you can't apply that to everyone who opposes Israeli government policy.
For your new book, Muslim Anti-Semitism, you interviewed 70 Muslim students and college graduates in Germany and Britain. Tell us some of the things that these people said about the Jews.
There were a lot of claims about Jewish financial and political clout. For example, I heard allegations that some of the supermarket chains in Germany belong to the Jews, and that the financial markets belong to the Jews. Rothschild was a key word for some. They linked the strength of Israel to the financial influence of the Rothschild family.
But a lot of these claims are just cliches. They have no basis in fact, but people repeat them anyway. Were you surprised that educated people would say such things?
I was surprised when a young engineer told me that 120 Zionists are trying to control the entire world. It's a conspiracy theory. But when I asked her to define Zionist, she couldn't. Then I asked her whether all Jews were Zionists, and she said, well, no, not necessarily. So there's some ambiguous thinking here. And of course, I was surprised by these claims. Some had hostile attitudes toward Jews, but this was linked almost exclusively to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You have to stress that.
These cliches are common among German neo-Nazis, that Jews are strange and greedy. But you also heard them from Muslims.
Yes, but that is precisely the difference. The racist hatred of Jews that developed in the Christian Western world is something else altogether. It started with the claim that the Jews killed Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And Christians, of course, can never forgive that. That's how it started. But Muslims don't share that narrative. Muslims and Jews are involved in a territorial conflict. Many Muslims believe that non-Muslims should not be allowed to live in that land. A lot of Palestinians and other Arabs and Muslims see the creation of Israel in terms of outsiders unfairly taking over land that belonged to the Palestinians.
But isn't there more to it than just territory? Don't the Palestinians have this feeling of impotence when up against a powerful state like Israel?
That is, that sense of powerlessness is based on a perception of injustice and a pro-Palestinian mindset that leads some people to take action. That's different from someone who says, I'm going to side with the Palestinians in their conflict with Israel. So they burn a flag or punch a Jew on the street. That's the difference. And that's where this sense of impotence comes from.
This sort of thinking appeals to young Muslims in particular. In your book, you say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the main source of anti-Semitism among Muslims. Is that also the case here in Germany, which has taken in a lot of Muslims? Are Jewish communities in Germany justified in their concern that the recent wave of Muslim refugees will include a large number of anti-Semites?
In my opinion, the fear is based on the wrong grounds. But when Jews in Germany are concerned about a particular situation, it attracts the attention of politicians and certain segments of the population for reasons that are well known. But don't forget that the Jewish people and Jewish minority populations in general, and the Jewish minority in Germany in particular, have a privileged status. They're doing well in society, and their voices are heard. A minority group needs two things: access to social discourse and a public platform. Jews in Germany have that, but the large Muslim community does not. There are nearly 5 million Muslims in Germany, but they don't have access to that social discourse, and no one listens to them.
Some in the Jewish community claim that you are relativizing the facts of the situation. There have been more attacks recently in Germany against Jews. What do you say to your critics?
The point is whether there are legitimate grounds for these fears. I think that these fears have been fanned both by Jews and well-meaning German philo-Semites, as well as German politicians who are looking for a political advantage.
Speaking of politicians, the German Conservative parties say that Muslim high school students should be required to take courses that outline the values found in our Constitution. What do you say to that?
I think that everyone should take those courses. Why limit it to Muslim students? How about young people or not so young people who set refugee centers on fire? Shouldn't they be required to take courses in German constitutional values?
That's certainly a hot topic of discussion right now. But do you really find such discussions a good idea?
I think it's always good to discuss values with everyone. But we have to do a lot more. We also have to teach people to show empathy. People must have empathy for the hardships, the needs, the fears, and the pain that others have experienced. That does not mean that we have to share their views. But we have to respect those views and respect their feelings. And that's something that the educational system should deal with. It's a very important point.
Respect for other cultures is important. But what we're seeing instead of that in Israel is a continuing spiral of hatred and violence. A number of Palestinians have been killed in recent clashes. How do you view this situation? You grew up in Israel and you served in the military there. What goes through your mind when you see this kind of violence on the TV?
Of course, it's very, very unpleasant. You ask yourself whether it's really necessary for Israeli soldiers to fire at civilians. Many people believe that this situation is simply disgraceful. But you also have to understand that a lot of Israelis are very nervous right now. Many Israelis are worried about hordes of Palestinians coming across the border. But we have to find a better solution, instead of shooting at civilians.
As our interview draws to a close, I'd like you to complete 3 sentences for us. President Trump's decision to move the US Embassy to Jerusalem is
Stupid, dangerous, and political dynamite.
Your parents were German Jews who emigrated to Palestine. You recently applied for and received a German passport because
in the wake of Brexit, I was worried that having a British passport, there'd be a chance that I wouldn't be allowed to live and work in Germany and other EU states.
My hope for Israel as it turns 70 is
I'd like to see Israel return to the old values, the same ones that my parents' generation had, when they founded and built the State of Israel.
David Ranan, thank you.
Thank you.